Welcome to Build Your Maverick Business, the podcast for underdog, outlier, and renegade entrepreneurs. Brought to you by Strange Creative Studio. If you dream of going off on your own and launching your rebel empire, but don't know where to start, you're in the right place. We'll teach you how to use mindset, branding, and practical advice to build a killer business and transform your world. And now, here's your host, founder of Strange, Alex Pitt.
All right, you lot, how's it going? Hope you're well. I know I tend to start episodes with some sort of ridiculous story. I'm going to skip that for the time being because I'm very excited to say this entire episode is about storytelling. So I do have some ridiculous stories coming for you, but I'm just going to do a little intro first into what this is going to be about and where I'm going with it because you know me, it's going to get a bit ridiculous. So this week's episode and next week's episode tie very closely together, but we're going to split them out so as not to cause overwhelm because this is very important stuff. This is very powerful stuff and I don't want you to all get overwhelmed by trying to do it all at once. So I'm going to kick this week off by doing what I love best. Telling a story that is seemingly completely unrelated to business. Okay, so I absolutely nerd out over certain films, certain franchises. One of them is Batman. We've got a lot of Batman comics on the wall. Come on, he's a goth superhero. He's my favourite. So this film in particular, The Dark Knight, you might have heard of it. I really hope you've seen it. If not, off you go. That's your homework for this week. So The Dark Knight, this is an incredible film and the bad guy is the Joker, right? Absolutely legendary performance from Heath Ledger. So in this one particular scene, what I'm going to reference to you right now, and I swear it's relevant, I am going to come back to this in a minute, but it is relevant. In this one scene, Alfred and Bruce Wayne are having a little chat about the Joker. Okay, this absolute maniac who is causing sweet fucking havoc over Gotham. The Joker, they're having a little chat about him, trying to understand what makes him tick. So Bruce Wayne says, criminals aren't all that complicated, right? Criminals aren't all that complicated, and we just need to work out what he wants. We just need to work out what he's after. Now Alfred, brackets Michael Caine, jumps in to tell a story to kind of throw off that theory that criminals aren't all that complicated. A story which is so powerful, it not only gives you chills in the moment, but it makes the villain, it makes the Joker seem so much more sinister than he had done before this story. Okay, so Alfred recalls a time when he was working in Burma for the local government with a group of friends, and they were trying to buy the loyalty of tribal leaders by bribing them with precious stones. The only problem was there was a bandit who kept robbing the vans and clearing them out of these stones. So Alfred and his mates, they went looking for the missing stones. But in 6 months, they didn't meet a single person within miles who had traded with this bandit who had stolen all of their precious stones. Until one day, they saw a little kid playing with a ruby, as Alfred puts it, the size of a tangerine. It turns out the bandit had stolen these precious stones only to throw them away. So why steal them in the first place? Asked Batman. And he responds with this iconic line, some men aren't looking for anything logical like money. They can't be bought, bullied, reasoned or negotiated with. Some men just want to watch the world burn. Fucking mic drop. I mean, what a powerful line, what a powerful lead up to that absolute iconic delivery. Now, I start with that partly because I needed a story to kick off this episode, partly just because I wanted to talk about Batman. Why the fuck not? But this week we are talking about storytelling. You may have noticed I love a good story. I love to tell you ridiculous stories about my life. Being the lanky dork that I am, I have a fair few. But I also love to tell you stories that illustrate my point when it comes to business. So I'm going to tell you another story now, which is a lot more closely linked to business, all right? So I want you to imagine that you are at a networking event. And if you've not been to a networking event before, it goes a little bit like this. You turn up to a room full of people with a pack of business cards, a little bit nervous because you don't know anyone. You get handed a glass of wine that tastes like vinegar And then you start chatting away to people who either you can help with what they're doing or they can help you out, right? So it's just about creating those connections. So imagine that this chap walks up to you and you start talking to him and you get past all of the small talk, all of the weather's been nice, all that sort of thing. And you get to talking about what it is you do for a living. So you say to him, what is it that you do? Whatever his name is. Now, I want you to imagine two separate responses to this question, right? Now, the first one is, I am an angel investor and I started my own wealth family office, so I source startups looking for investment. Okay, that's option number one. Option number two. Imagine he says to you, right, well, I'll tell you what, to explain better what it is that I do, I'll tell you a story. So one day I was hanging out in this beautiful little town in Italy and I decided one evening that I was going to go for a jog. The sun was setting, this place has got cobbled streets and gorgeous history around the town, so I thought that would be an amazing way to spend an evening. I went for this run and as I approached this bridge, I saw this elderly couple and they were laughing, they were giggling and teasing each other and they just looked so happy. They must have been in their 80s at least. And I was so curious about how this couple had stayed so desperately in love into this ripe old age that they were. So I walked up to them and I said, oh, excuse me, I hope you don't mind me asking, but what's your secret? How are you so happy after all of these years? And they responded that our generation didn't throw things away that were damaged or broken. We fixed them. And this guy that you're talking to just looks so emotional as he tells his story. And he says, that's what I want to do for businesses, right? I don't want to see a business that's failing and just let it be thrown away. I want to be able to fix things. So that's why I started my Wealth Family Office. And now I work with startups who are in need of a bit of TLC and I help them get back to a really good place. Now, the reason I give you two options, number one and number two, is have a think about which of those introductions, which of those conversations, which of the responses to that question, what do you do, are you going to remember? Which of those actually made you feel something? Which of them is going to make you think back to this person when you need to make a referral or when you need to introduce somebody or when you actually need to employ somebody's skills? I should pause there, by the way, and mention that this is a story that I tell in the Brand Masterclass that I do with the Portfolio Collective. So if you are thinking at the moment about your personal brand and that story spoke to you, drop me a message and I will give you the details of that because we are just working out the dates. So the reason that I find stories are the most effective way to get your point across, they paint a picture, right, of wider context so that when you come to the end, the big finale, the punchline, people are already kind of there with you. So the reason this week we're talking about stories is that next week we're going to take those stories and figure out our mission and values when it comes to our brand, okay? Now I want you to think back to the very first episode of this podcast. I told you my story, my brand story. I told you about how I always felt like a weirdo and an outsider since I was a teenager, and how I thought that was a bad thing until I realised that blending in will make you completely forgettable and dull as fuck. So when I started my business, when I started Strange, I applied that revelation to the work that I did, and I vowed to help the underdogs, the outliers, and the mavericks carve out their place in the world just like I had done. Now, I know there are a lot of you that have listened to this podcast from the start. I see you, I love you, I appreciate you. Thank you so much for sticking with me all this time. I know because you tell me, and also because I have analytics and I'm watching you all. Just kidding, that sounded creepy as fuck. No, can you imagine if on that first episode where I shared my story, right, if I had come onto this podcast in episode 1 as the founder of a design/branding agency, and I said, hello, I am Alex. I run a branding agency called, I don't know, The Design People or Brands Are Us. Imagine if I talked to you solely about industry statistics and Pantone references, if I harped on about my favourite fonts, if I stuck to purely transactional stuff and talked to you about business as if I'm the Financial fucking Times. Factually accurate, but it doesn't create that emotional connection. The equivalent of like an automated menu on the phone when you just want to speak to a representative. Stories are human. Stories inspire. They invoke emotions. They create that sense of empathy. They weave together something that we can relate to, that we can understand. So telling the story about why this business, your business, came to exist has the potential to speak to people on a deeper level than, hey, here's what we're selling. It explains why they should fucking care about what you're selling. Now, even though my story is a kind of shortened version of my life history, that doesn't necessarily mean that your business was born in the same way. Maybe you started a jewelry business because you had a relative who had a collection you loved. And when you tell your story, you drift back to the afternoon sat in her living room poring over every piece while she snuck you packets of sweets. Maybe you went through a really difficult time in your life, and that spurred you to create a solution so that nobody else has to suffer like you did. Was there a trigger point that kicked it all off? A childhood obsession, a passing encounter with a stranger? Either way, if you can describe the driving force behind doing what you do, you'll have a much better chance in forming those emotional connections. That's it for me this week, my darlings. Tell your story. Think about why you're doing this. And next week, we're going to break it all down and look at our mission and values. I'll catch you here next time.
Got an idea for a maverick business of your own? Learn how to build a powerful brand that will get people obsessed with our online program, not just a pretty logo. You'll learn a simple step-by-step framework that will kickstart your killer brand and help you find your raving fan base. Find out more today at strangecreativestudio.com.